What's going on, Reef Builders? I am Jake Adams and I'm here in Winter Park, Florida to visit Top Shelf Aquatics. I'm here with one of the owners, Kevin Berta. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Oh, it's great to have you, Jake.
I think it's been about 3 years since I visited the place. The farm was just getting started, and I cannot believe how much you guys have packed in here. You have these display style aquariums that you're growing all your corals in. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, well, we really wanted to have a nice presentation overall here, have a lot more water volume overall for the health of the corals and system stability, especially with these SPS colonies that we're growing, you know, to be able to really see underneath through them, have these arrays here that we're able to have elevated and have rock kind of trapped underneath it. It sort of creates more of a display tank effect overall for system stability. And you know, overall just really looks nice and allows us to pack these things right in. So.
Cool. Well, there's definitely like a lot of reefing DIY ethos built into everything you're doing here. Even when you're using equipment, you are using equipment in ways other than it was intended, and I cannot wait to show you guys. So thanks for joining us on this video. We're going to take a walk around and show you a bunch of cool stuff.
All right, so this system here is where we keep a lot of our incoming pieces and various collector ones that we're pretty much growing out before they have a chance to fully run through quarantine. You know, a lot of the wild pieces we're observing, growing, getting healthy before we process them. Anyone who knows us knows that we're stickheads here for the most part. And I mean, this is pretty much my playhouse here. Just got slam-packed colonies all across the board. And if you kind of pass along here, see we have all these beautiful corals here, fragged off of many of these for sale. And we also try to get a lot of variety here for all those beginners and people who just aren't really into SPS as much, you know, all the softies and, you know, different things. We're really getting into a lot of the short tentacle gonoporas, even leathers, you know, the various Japanese toadstool varieties and nice flowy polyp leathers we're starting to propagate as well. You know, even in the sumps here, we try to maximize every little bit of space. So a lot of the low light stuff we put down here, you know, different chalices, mushrooms. We have a whole slew of bounce mushrooms over here, like you see. As you can see, are powered exclusively by G4 Ecotech Radions. We really love the performance we get and the color spectrum. Everything in here just thrives under this ecosystem overall, and we couldn't be happier with that lighting. The spectrums we typically use, I would say, it may vary a little bit from what would be, I guess, industry standard. A lot of people kind of go in the route of AB+. I mean, radiant color is more what it's based off of, but we really minimize out a lot of the in my opinion, more useless spectrums like the reds, the cyans and the greens, and we go much, much heavier on the blue spectrums along with cool whites and a little bit of full spectrum white as well.
So why don't you like red and green?
A lot of that's more just for visual appeal, and the reds can really promote algae growth overall, so we're just trying to minimize that, especially since in a lot of these systems, we maintain a little bit higher nutrients than what some people would consider more standard. Okay, so we keep the nutrients a little bit higher than I would say what most people would consider standard overall, because the corals are really packed in here. And one observation we made as we progressed and filled out these systems is that, you know, your normal maybe 5 to 0 nitrate just wasn't enough, and we were having things shrivel up, less color. Even in the SPS systems, a lot of them we gravitate more towards 15 to 20 on the nitrate, believe it or not. And phosphate's typically around 0.05 to 0.1. As far as dosing nutrients, we generally try to stay away from that where we can, but sometimes we do. I mean, we're very strict about those sorts of things. We do daily testing As far as a lot of those, and follow-up tests on the ones that are out of range, pretty much once or twice a day, and we'll adjust with a little bit of phosphate and nitrogen dosing as needed, but typically we try to have a stable fish load to maintain that about where we want, and we'll also balance that more with coral foods overall. So typically these tanks, let's say you see the phosphates are running a little low. Rather than us dosing phosphates if it's close, we would just maybe chum the water a little bit with some amino acids and some reef nutrition blends and things like that. If we notice the phosphates are creeping up a little higher, we're actually huge on Benepets. Benepets, we've observed, have actually noticeably lowered the phosphates in the systems, even while providing the coral with nutrition. So that's a huge plus for us too. Now we still dose those nutrients if they're further out of whack, or if we're overfeeding or something along those lines and it's kind of necessary. But again, we try to keep things more naturally balanced overall. Showed you a lot about the sticks, and we have plenty more of that to come, but overall, I'd still like to show you what we do here. We're really trying to diversify our collection, doing a lot more soft coral and different LPS, low light stuff overall, just to kind of hit all the corners of the hobby, because everyone's got their own preferences and niches, and we love it all too. These systems here, we do maintain a little bit more elevated nutrients. We tend to feed a little bit more of the particulate foods, and some of the chalices that you'll see over there will actually spot feed more. In addition to that, a little less flow overall as well too.
Okay, what nitrate and phosphate do you aim for these?
These ones usually hover around 20 to 25. Sometimes the phosphates, again, right around that 0.1 level overall. Between temperature with the sticks and this kind of stuff, we don't really consider that too much of a difference. We generally aim to be around 78 degrees, and it seems to do pretty well and maintain a nice happy medium. Well, I know you love your toadstools, so this guy here is a real pretty Japanese variety that we've been farming for a while. It gets really nice long flowy tentacles as well, and that nice rich green body to go with it. That's definitely one of my favorites.
You got a big old,
like we were talking about earlier too, we started farming a lot of different Galaxia varieties as well, which is something that you don't see as much, but they're really pretty corals, and there's so many varieties that come in overall, so we're just trying to really grow whatever we can at the end of the day and provide the customers what they want.
And Galaxias are indestructible. Too bad they're so aggressive.
Yeah. That's one of those corals that they can be aggressive, but if you have a good sized tank or you have a more open sand bed, what I like to do is just plop a rock down and make a little island and just kind of isolate them over that way so they won't encroach onto the rest of the structure and fry your other coral. Over here you can see we actually have a lot more varieties of these different toadstools that we're growing too.
Oh, I really like that one. I have a piece like this big.
Yeah, they're real pretty, and they add a lot of flow to the tank overall and motion that a lot of people really like to see, especially those who get bored a little bit by the Acropora and the Montipora, since you're not really going to get that as much. Well, here we have a lot of the staged out coral that you'd see on the website. All the Monties in here run through a really thorough quarantine process that I would say is tops in the industry as far as that goes. And that's something we'll probably touch on a little bit later, because anyone who's been in it long enough knows the headaches of having those problems where you have a whole collection wiped out with nudibranchs and that sort of thing. Over here too, you'll see a lot of the different mushrooms. We're doing a lot with the bounce mushrooms too. We got good variety of that: Sunkist, Frankensteins, OGs, Biohazards. We have some of our own varieties too that we've been farming as well. One called Infinity Gauntlet, that's one of my favorites. And then here's kind of the next wave of pieces that have come through quarantine recently. This system's going to be more converted over to a lot of the LPS that you see here, which will all be fully quarantined pieces that will add a lot more variety to what you see on our website. Interestingly, obviously the power levels in here you'll see are going to be quite a bit different than what you'd have in a lot of your Acropora tanks. Overall it really depends on what type of softie and LPS, but we would range anywhere from, I would say, as high as, surprisingly, up to 300 micromoles down to maybe as low as 75. and things seem to do really well there. We just kind of play around with different coral varieties and species and try out different lighting intensities and spectrums to see where they're the happiest and kind of roll with that section. That's the benefit of having a lot of tanks and a lot of different lights that you can zone out overall. So it really helps us out there. So a lot of you guys are probably wondering what we put in this tank to grow all these corals and really supply all the skeleton structure that you see here. Overall, we're using, I would say, the majority 3-part dosing like you would do at home. The Red Sea products that we use for calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium, we've found to be very reliable, very concentrated, and very pure as far as not having a lot of cross contaminants and things like that. In addition to that, an old school contraption that you don't see as much around these days would be a good old caulk stir. By pumping that calcium hydroxide in the water, it helps dramatically boost the pH overall without spiking up the alkalinity nearly as much as what you would have in your alk dosing with the Red Sea.
How much do you add?
Believe it or not, in a lot of these systems with the demand, we're going close to almost full top off. So 15 to 20 gallons a day in a lot of the SPS systems.
For what size volume?
And that would just depend on the system, but overall these are typically around 1,500 to 2,500 gallon systems.
Very cool.
Yep. One other thing we're doing, as needed, you notice on the doser, we actually have synthesis, which is a source of nitrate. So a lot of these corals just start to consume so much that even with all these massive fish and the feedings that we're doing, in some of our systems we've had to actually dose even on top of that to maintain the levels that keep the rich, vibrant color that you see here. So as you see here, we kind of use something a little unique that I hadn't really ever seen in the hobby. We use PVC arrays to mount a lot of these mother colonies. Now the main reason for that is we can suspend a lot of the live rock, provide a habitat for the fish, and things like peppermint shrimp and that sort of stuff in the system overall. Run it more like a display tank where you're getting a lot of the biological media as well with all this rock. And then the corals themselves just pop right off the array. So if you need to frag something or move it based on its health or lighting, or if it's just getting too big, you can easily do that. And we can also customize the lengths of the arms and things along those lines as well. So the first iteration of this was actually created kind of by accident because I had an orange passion colony in my display tank that was epoxied down. And I could always lift it up when I was fragging it, and it kind of had a cupping structure on it that would poke on the rock. So I just pop it out, clip, 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 put it right back in its place. And I was doing that frequently enough where that never really anchored itself to the rock. So the next farm, we ended up gluing a bunch of couplings to the rock structures, and that allowed us to put a lot of the coral on there as well. But it tended to mound up a little bit more and didn't give us a nice flat plane of light. And then if we had nuisance algae and things like that that we were dealing with, we didn't have the option of removing rock and doing any of that, so it was more fixed. So this version was kind of the best of both worlds, where the whole thing can be pulled apart, disassembled, modified, resized, all that. So the PVC array that you see here, the kind of specialty part that you're probably not going to find at your local Home Depot is the little star piece in the middle, which is actually used to create domes, surprisingly. And then we were attaching couplings and mounting 90-degree fittings and things like that to build the overall array, along with some other base structure fittings that they use in furniture, like side output tees and side output crosses and things like that. This system we've been using for, I would say, about 2 years. The legs have a little bit of elevation to where we try to blast flow underneath the rock and keep most of that rock off the bottom, so there's a lot less accumulation of detritus. I mean, like any bare bottom tank though, you have little pockets that you'll have to suck out, but it definitely makes it a lot easier and minimizes that overall. As far as stagnation, that has never really been an issue for us. A lot of the parts have open holes, so it tends to sort of breathe in a way as far as water going in and out. So that's not really been an issue where we have anaerobic pockets or anything like that popping up and causing problems in the system. So if you're trying to set something up at home, I would say go for it. You shouldn't have any issues. I mean, the biggest thing is the flexibility, the option to kind of resize and shift things based on how big the colonies are getting, you know, heights overall, lengths, angles, all that you don't really get with a frag rack. And then the biggest benefit really is just having that total flow through the top and the bottom overall that, again, you don't really get from a frag rack that kind of just creates a wall and blocks a lot of that off. As far as flow in these systems go, you know, it's very important for the Acropora and Montipora to keep detritus from settling and just really get this stuff flowing and happy. So as you can see, we're a huge fan of the Vortec pumps. We have MP40s, MP60s powering these, along with you know, some different pumps that we kind of flank it with depending on the tank. We also put pumps down low to shoot under the array and in there to really kind of keep the base level clean and, you know, not have as much stagnation down low. And then overall turnover in the system, each tank is powered by a Vectra L2, about 3,000 gallon per turnover independently. They are set to run at various cycles throughout the day. So they will kind of run through and hit short pulses and then, you know, a lot of the long gyres. To be able to reach across an 8-foot tank like this, you really do have to have some longer stretches overall in here. So yes, the Vortex, they do an excellent job. To determine if you have enough flow, a lot of the times you're going to look over the coral, you know, see those polyps really dancing. A lot of times I like to see them with the, you know, the back forth flow there, not seeing areas where detritus is settling a lot in the system overall. Sometimes you can go a little too far and you'll see corals that will be almost too close, getting hammered where the tissue almost gets thin and actually will get bare to the point where it'll die off. But generally speaking, the Acropora can take almost as much as you can throw at it as long as it's intermittent. So one unique feature you may notice is how, when you have a tank this close together, can you fit an MP60? And how is it in an overflow box if water's in there? Well, we actually had read a handful of instances online and different people on the forums, including yourself, who had incorporated these methods using a dry box, which is essentially just a divider within the overflow box that keeps the water out, and therefore it allows you to put the dry side in there and incorporate that deeper into the tank and make it a little more, you know, multi-dimensional. To add a little extra flow, we'll usually throw whatever pumps we got lying around to kind of angle and hit the areas that this doesn't really allow us to. And being that this is a 4-foot wide tank, hitting across the front as these colonies got really big seemed very important to us overall, and the coral really seemed to benefit from it. As far as pumps for kind of just shooting sheer force and flanking, I would say overall I'm happiest with the Sea-Cheese. We're using the Voyager 10s, which really push some serious water in these big tanks, and they allow us to shoot over the top really well because, again, that pump is much more directional versus the MP that tends to do more of a broad spread wave. So overall we're real happy with that. We also use the Octopulses, which they definitely do the job too, but they weren't really hitting all the way across like we found on the newer systems with the Sea-Cheese pumps. So you guys are probably wondering what we use to cook all these sticks to get this color. Overall, the main lighting that runs these systems are the Ecotech Radions. Now we are using the G4s still on a lot of these tanks. Love the punch they get on these taller systems overall. And they're running for about 12 hours a day for the majority of the coverage. And then we're using 400 watt metal halide radium bulbs with nice widespread reflectors to really get that daylight boost in the middle of the day, typically for about 4 to 6 hours overall. And it really covers every inch of this tank with nice blanket lighting. We've been real happy with the results overall. Now, if you look over here, we like to experiment, so we really were trying a different method, and we wanted to go heavy on a zone that had a little more punch as far as the T5 bulbs. So these things, we're getting about 350 par, I would say, with just the T5s, and then we were running Orfec LEDs to go heavy on the blue spectrums to kind of use this zone to really bring out more of the fluorescence and coloration on a lot of this stuff. And you know, it's primarily with the LED running deep blues and UVs overall. And then the T5 bulbs, we have some Coral Pluses in there and then a good amount of Blue Pluses overall. If you look at the par numbers in here, we're ranging anywhere from, I would say, 350 micromole to anywhere up to 700 in some of the systems, believe it or not. Now you got to kind of toe that line based on your nutrient levels and the corals on how they're responding and how long the interval is. But we cook our sticks hard, and we tend to get really good color that way because we're maintaining a little higher level of nutrients overall, and we're able to pull that off. If you notice, this spectrum tends to be a lot heavier on the deep blue side of things. You know, it's mostly going to bring out a lot more of the coloration in the coral. In this system over here, you see we're running a much more white spectrum with the metal halides, and that tends to get a little bit better growth overall. You know, long term, we were even thinking about experimenting with some different spectrum bulbs, you know, maybe some 14Ks and maybe some daylight, you know, 6Ks, things like that, just to see what kind of colors we can pull and maybe even try to push the growth levels even further. You know, and it's good to have a lot of tanks to have those options, so we're really kind of blowing it up, and we're always open to experimentation. So what you're seeing here is one of our newest systems and the largest SPS grow system. You know, we built the array and are getting ready to plant seeds all across this thing and turn them all into colonies. I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of how we do most of our filtration in these systems. Now, if you take a look under the hood, first off, you'll see top shelf plumbing all over the place. A lot of heavy mechanical filtration here with the filter socks. Then we move over here. I have these channels where we run a lot of the biological media and rubble rock, and it acts as a cryptic zone where we grow a lot of natural sponge and filter feeders that help keep that water polished. We typically do run carbon, you know, monthly, just to kind of keep the organics in check and to just make sure there's no other contaminants and overall polish the water. Occasionally GFO if needed. Typically that's not in use. These Quantum Nio skimmers I'm a big fan of. Very easy to tune. We don't really have to worry about a lot of the overflow issues that you have with some of the other skimmers that can be a little more sensitive. Now if you look over here, we have our refugium area where we have a lot of this tumbling macroalgae, and a lot of people would be finding it strange to see all these fish in here. Now the fish we actually put in, especially when we're jump starting a new system, to add bioload overall and keep our nitrogen levels up where we want them to, so we're not going to have to overdose nitrate. And they do tend to pick at a lot of the nuisance hair algae that tend to accumulate on a lot of these plants too. So they kind of serve a double purpose. And then as they overgrow, we tend to just remove them from the system as the nutrients settle out and a lot of the tangs in the displays get bigger. You know, these other systems here are powered by Vectra L2 pumps. We also have some Hydros wave engines running some of the gyre pumps on the shallow frag tanks. The gyres work great for those. And then we're using the Neptune dose pumps, which are, as you can see right now, that Kalkwasser is just humming through there. This system's sucking up probably about 15 gallons a day already, and we don't even have that much coral in here. And overall, we got even extra pumps here, eventually to dose amino acids, and maybe even throw a mini fridge on here long term.
And then what you got going on over here?
Now this side, you'll see again our caulk stir, and then our alkalinity dosing, and we have the magnesium and calcium, which right now we're just hand dosing since the consumption hasn't gone up to that level. And then we also have a big geo calcium reactor that we're going to be hooking up soon. Since this system is going to be packed so full, we're just really trying to maintain as much stability and reduce the amount of dosing we're putting in here overall. Another thing you might notice here is we're a big advocate on UV sterilization. You know, that's one of those things in a lot of systems, especially when they're new, you can have things popping up like dinoflagellates, or, you know, even if there was issues with fish or other types of algae and water clarity, it really helps us out overall. And we actually run pretty heavy flow through these things to the ability to run almost 3,000 gallons per hour. You know, these are the Pentair units, the Smart UVs, 150 watts each. You know, another thing we incorporated in this system was these big titanium heaters here. You know, overall, you can see a lot of hobbyists having issues with heaters failing. And that's one of those things that, with everything we have at stake, we just wanted really the best unit we could get and something that we could really count on that wasn't going to fail. So most of these systems are equipped with these big units, and they handle it really well. I haven't had a single issue. You're probably wondering what's powering most of the water flow through this system. You see here, we got a nice array of Vectra L2s, which we found to be very reliable pumps, very strong as far as the water flow overall, and you know, just do a great job.
And what are these powering?
Each independent tank has its own pump. Each UV sterilizer is also getting fed with that, and then one of the UVs bypasses through and controls the refugium as well. And then we also, if you look behind you there, have a secondary tank where we put more fish and more rock and just kind of a spillover zone. Like right now you'll actually see a little CSB anemone in there. All right, as you see here, it's a big farm, so we need some massive water tanks to accommodate the demand. Overall, we got two 1,000 gallon vats. This one, believe it or not, is actually the auto top-off reservoir for the whole farm. So we have lines running through the roof, pretty much controlling all these systems. And then we have it set up where we can transfer over the fresh water into the salt mixing vat here, which we're using the Red Sea Blue Bag. You know, we're a big fan of that because it has more of a natural seawater level alkalinity and calcium. We're not a huge fan of the super salts. A lot of times when we do water changes, we just don't want to have to deal with those alkalinity fluctuations overall, since we run our alkalinity typically around 8.3. You know, this unit here also is equipped with a valve for filling buckets, and then we have a huge hose where we can do water changes that reach pretty much anywhere in the farm and fill our maintenance van for installations as well. Then I show you around. Obviously we got to go check out the lab. So let's poke over here. You can see where we do most of our work as far as the water testing and fragging. And we actually have our coral quarantine systems over here as well. Obviously, when it comes to coral quarantine, we could do a whole video on that, but we'll keep it quite simple here. Mainly what you're seeing is 3 independently plumbed systems. Overall, everything that goes through gets inspected, rebased, goes through a bunch of various dips, mainly with bare and you know, other things that we're kind of incorporating based on the coral. The big part of it is really rebasing and just getting things where you're not transferring over eggs. Everything that even gets into these systems is observed to be pest-free for a month before it ever reaches here. Then we have stage 1, and then it'll go through stage 2. Mainly we do that for redundancy overall. That way, if anything were to happen or possibly get slipped through the cracks or somebody makes a mistake, we'll have a backup where we can hit it again for another month over here too. We actually have a batch of coral here that is just finishing up the quarantine process. It's going to be leaving here next Tuesday, getting rebased, inspected, and dipped one last time and making it into our quarantine systems. That way you as a hobbyist can go ahead and bring these things home, and you don't have to worry about getting those nasty pests in your tank that can wipe out a whole collection, as a lot of people who've been in the hobby for a long time have always had that heartache and had to go through that experience. So if you buy from Top Shelf, you can buy with confidence that we're going to get you really clean, healthy coral. And obviously this is just one of our new systems. You know, the customer demand has just been huge, so we just keep growing and growing, adding more tanks. I mean, if you look around here, every inch of this place is just packed full. We even have grow out tanks down below the tanks here, coral all in the sumps, and this massive new wing of systems that's coming online here and cycling currently, so we can continue to add more variety and hot stuff. In addition to that, we're going to be importing a lot more sticks as well, too, for all you, to get more new releases and get a little more diversity in our collection as far as a lot more LPS and anemones. I'm even going to start doing mini max propagation as well. All sorts of stuff that's going to be coming in the next year. So it's pretty exciting here at Top Shelf, and you know, it's all because of the customer support we're getting, and you know, we just love this, really. We just love to supply the whole industry with more healthy stuff overall, and you know, it's just a dream come true. So
Kevin, man, I really want to thank you for walking me through your entire farm. I think I saw it like 2 or 3 years ago. You had just a few aisles going, but it was a really unique experience for me to direct you into, you know, just talking about the reef stuff, talking about like the nuts and bolts of your operation. And it's just really cool to see that you're still experimenting with all kinds of different lights, all kinds of different water flow. So is there anything else you want to say about the farm that we haven't already covered?
You know, overall, I would just say just continued growth, experimentation, just like you said. I mean, it was a pleasure having you here for sure. You know, and overall, I just love to share what we're doing with the rest of the world, really.
Very cool. Well, the passion of Top Shelf Aquatics that they have for their corals is absolutely undeniable. I hope that it shows through in the video, and I will thank everybody for joining us on this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions about Top Shelf Aquatics, their corals, and how they do their reef tanks, now's a perfect opportunity to get their attention and get their feedback. I'm sure Kevin and the crew will be replying into the comments. Kevin, thank you so much for this tour, and thank you guys for making this possible. We'll catch you guys on a future video very soon.